Yeah. So I think to start out with, I've always been interested in the Middle Eastern inner and dance. So more especially inner dance from the point of view of the East and the Middle. And so I'm quite excited about this moment. Thank you for inviting me into your sacred space. And Dubai probably holds a special set of keys to unlocking the mystery of what is there in the region in general. So I like the concept of the middle. The middle is the heart is the core is the essence. So today let's talk about sound. I think this is up and coming globally. People are realizing the importance of sound. Sometimes we call it music, sometimes we call it noise. Music is somehow like organized noise. And when we close our eyes, sometimes we realize even in the silence there is a sound. And then when you go into the inner dance, something more interesting happens where inside the sound there is a silence. Just like in the dance there is a stillness. So sometimes the more you stop, the more you try to stay still, there's actually like this inner movement happening. So I do believe that inner dance is a good name for this energy. So let's talk about music. We take it for granted. Like music is music. It's that which comes out of culture, that bears sonic meanings that are at times entertaining, at times ritualistic. You would find it in religion. You'd find music in art. Is it an expression? Is it something we create? We realize in this process, music is somehow composing us. Sometimes we can get a sense of quite the opposite. Music decomposes us. So I feel that we're becoming more and more sensitive to music as something that's not just an object. It's somehow alive. In a way, it's old, So we may as well start to conceptualize music not just as an art form, not just as a symbolic carrier of messages that were from the past. In a way, music is vibration. And if we just see it as that, then our bodies, our brains, our minds are bearing these intimate relationships with music. And so inner dance seems to be one of the discourses or practices in the world that's pinpointing to, hey, look at this. This is interesting. Maybe we didn't understand it as much as we might be understanding it today through experience. Because that's one of the questions, isn't it? Like, we've been listening to music for a long time, but why is it doing this now, this ability to take us into this really deep, profound, highly intelligent, and sometimes, or more often, weird, strange, dreamlike. So music, in a way, entrains our experience and our perception. There's always this music happening outside. Nature has music. Animals conduct music. When you learn to listen to them, there are rhythms, harmonies. We ourselves, when we express our intention, Anger has music. Sadness has music. Grief has music. Joy has music. So music from a really ancient space, like a deep history space, then possibly holds secrets to the origins, like the origins of the mind. When did thinking, thought process, when did it begin? Language. Could we actually have arrived at speech and language as we know it without harmonizing with the other members of the tribe when there was the emotion of tribulation, celebration, war? We discovered the drum, we discovered ways to clap our hands, stomp our feet, in order to connect with other members of the species. And somehow these sounds began to serve as containers for meaning. And now we utter these sounds that hold so much complexity. What is a word? What is a letter even? What is a phoneme? What is a morpheme? These really basic sounds that seems to have negotiated barbaric, say primitive, animistic, animal sounds. As we scattered across the earth, we were experiencing the earth, and something happened some thousands of years ago when we decided that certain sounds will hold certain meanings. And we, contained these meanings into small boxes called letters, phonetic symbols. And then it's interesting, you travel across the world, each sound changes rather subtly, depending on the climate, depending on our relationship with that part of the earth that held something special. So these languages bear systems, and when we go into the spiritual process, there's this going back to the origins of those original sounds that we used to make. Yet, in a way, we're not just going into the old way of having made those guttural animal sounds. We're also going into alien, codes and past and future now exploding within the present. So I think we're learning how to DJ the brain and the cosmos and the body. When we pick up these interesting music making devices, it could be an instrument, an actual instrument, it could be a digital instrument. The only difference between a digital instrument and an analog instrument is that digital instruments hold a lot of information. And every year, every decade, the amount of information that can fit into small places are increasing exponentially. So in a way, information is memory. Information is also dimensional, so that what used to be like a day years ago isn't a day anymore. It's like this dream, infinite land that we can explore, which is more like space, not just time. So music holds perception. That's the general sense. To make it more particular, that perception is called time perception. You can either expand time or contract time, depending on, like the language of the heartbeat. When your heartbeat slows down, what happens to time? When it goes faster, what happens to time. You can read that through the language of emotions. When you're excited, when you're terrified, when you're relaxed, what does your heartbeat say? The heartbeat actually determines our thoughts themselves. Our behavior is determined by this. I listened to a radio interview that happened just today in somewhere nearby the Middle East. It's from Cape Town in South Africa. It's a beautiful interview. It wasn't so long, and the host was really interested in this concept, trauma. She kept bringing it up, and she wanted to understand inner dance through trauma. You know, how do we release trauma? For me, trauma is about reaction. It's actually just response mechanisms. How we responded to events that took place during our formative years, what we normally call childhood, establishes more objectively what we usually call trauma. Did we run away? Did we fight? Did we face it? Did we look? Did we close up? So this is one of the things that are tapped into the inner dance. That's why we bring up the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic, the parasympathetic. And then when we bring up the circadian rhythms, I'm assuming that either Flor has brought this up or will eventually bring this up. The circadian rhythms are the waves that take place within circa DM, about a day, 24 hours. During the day and the night, our energy, our vibe goes up and it goes down, primarily because the species, the organism had to organize itself in relationality with night and day. Otherwise, we couldn't organize when we had to be more alert, be more sleepy, be more calm or relaxed, go to school, go finish your deadline, go do the laundry, take care of the kids, now I can rest. So we swing back and forth vibrations, which in a way are sounds. Sounds do have qualities called amplitude, wavelength. They go faster, they go slow. And so when we mention like the heartbeat or brain waves, even the breath rate, this actually is brain, breath, and blood equals rhythm, harmony, and melody. So I don't want to just talk about this. I'd love to do some demonstrations just using my laptop. You don't need to lay down to these. It's enough for you to take notice. I think it's better that your eyes are open while I go into a small monologue with these, and then we'll give ample time to a possible exchange where I'm pretty sure you would have some questions, you would have some realizations, you'd have some insights, you'd have these, eureka, I think I see it now. You are putting words into what I'm feeling energetically, and that could empower you to either learn how to facilitate the space, whether you call it inner dance or not. How do you bring alterations to the sound in the room, which is actually being organized by the autonomic nervous system, circadian rhythms, which means you can hold that vibratory space just by the understanding of what's actually happening. Okay, so let's see, I would have to share my screen, and what did we initially look at? Let's go to the cosmic brush. I'm going to go over different pictures, aka slides. These are the brain waves. What I find about this picture that's particularly interesting is normally this gamma waves is normally seen as something that goes on top, because it's you look at the speeds of delta. Actually, this is really disorganized in a way. Delta is the slowest, theta is a little bit faster, alpha's in the middle, beta is the fourth highest, and gamma is normally the super highest. So I think we're meant to look at something nonlinear about how these waves work. So maybe starting with this, there was this really big idea or word that was floating around the spiritual community largely many years ago. This is when I was going into my own awakening process. And the word was ascension, that spiritual awakening has to do with evolution and the this energy that's about like raising the vibration, raising the Divine Mother, raising Shakti, raising Kuan Yin, or the Divine Mother, the Kundalini. And what took a while to consider is that there's also this energy descent. It's not just about this thing that goes upwards. It's actually a space of a going down process. So we'll be interested in these two movements somehow, and how there's actually like a middle space where the higher goes lower and the lower goes upwards. So maybe one of the questions about inner dance that we can think of is, how do I know what is an inner dance vibration? How do I listen to a particular piece, like a particular song, and determine, okay, does that bring about like an inner dance? Say, if I open this up, that sounds like something you would use for maybe like meditation music. Okay, I'm not going to ask a question whether that's inner dance music. I'm just going to tell you that that's one of the initial ones that globally worked out. It won't sound familiar because I realized I put that in reverse. So it's the same song, but it's backwards. This is another one. Okay, so I want to bring these into question. Maybe this in particular. Let's open an app that will help us to look at this one in particular. What makes that an inner dance sound? Let's not even call it a song. Let's say a sound. That was Farewell Fangstein. Yeah, this is one of the favorites. I'm going to go forward in time, maybe somewhere here, where there's a climax or a peak point. Okay, I had to open it up in this one program because I can do things with this sound. So I'd like you to feel into this particular part of the song while I alter it through subtraction. I'm going to reduce certain parts of it so you can feel it with your body as you perceive with your eyes what is happening. So it's like we can alter the band members here by taking out the bassist or the guitar player or synthesizer or the drums one at a time. So I think going back to this particular picture, what you then might observe is that percussions, voice, like harmonic instruments, could be like a harp, could be a guitar, it could be like a piano. They all hold different properties. They all hold different properties. Having said that, let's go back to these. So, for example, let's say back here where it's a little bit wild. Oh. This is not a good example for what I'm trying to point out. This bring up white man's burden. So I want you to listen to the bass sound underneath everything, and where I have to put the drums on top of that. You can get a sense of the colors of the sound, that each of these dimensions and levels actually hold potential elements that hold like depth, something deep, and something faster, something higher. That certain elements are faster. This may not look fast to you, but when you look at the hertz level, gamma contains more waves, wave elements. The amplitude is low, but there are more the wavelength, it tends to be smaller, meaning there's a lot more waves than this beta looking one, which is normally when we are awake, normal. When we go into hyper reality, we go into more like gamma states. So something like this could be quite useful for facilitators to hold in understanding the nature or the mapping, the effects that, okay, actually there are certain aspects of this that get triggered depending on the type of sound that I emit. So we kind of want to map out what gets triggered by something slower, something faster, something more emotional, something more cognitive, something that's just really body based, something that's related just to the movements of the body, as opposed to, you look at this interesting thing at the back of the brain. This is the occipital lobe. Why and how is it that we start to see things? Was there a point where you actually started to smell things? This is obvious. You start remembering, you start feeling, and you start thinking, moving, sensing. I don't know if you taste anything in your inner dance process. This is kind of obvious. You will always activate the hearing lobe, or part of the in between the parietal and temporal lobe, hearing space. So there's a system here of activation, of resonance, and I think this is what I would like to bring up today, to point out, to allow us to have some interesting discussions. What's interesting here is you look at this lower part of the spectrum of waves experienced in our brain, or which is really just a mirror of our nervous systems, the central and peripheral nervous system. The finer waves, lower amplitude, faster, more, they happen around here at the base, the base of the skull, the basal ganglia, the reptilian brain, the animal brain. So what's interesting about here, when you look at the higher regions of the human process, cognition is actually slower. Like it's slower. So that when we begin to ask the question, like, where does thinking happen? The thinking happens more in the surface regions of our brain, near the cerebellum, the cranium. Like, so it's in this region right here. So that already could be quite interesting to think about. That when you were exposed to certain sounds, we more or less trigger either the more animal, the more instinctive, the less thinking modes of knowing, as opposed to, let's say, when we're in thought. It may not seem like that. Sometimes when we think we're thinking, our brain waves tend to be more erratic. We can probably perceive that through like music. Okay, before I bring this up, let's look at what are called wave forms. This is called the sine wave, the square wave, the triangle, and the sawtooth wave. I want to demonstrate to you what they sound like. This is a sine wave, and when you look at the way it looks smoother. Okay, and this wave rarely happens in your brain. We rarely experience this because, in a way, this is kind of artificial. You cannot actually simply emit a perfect wave. That's because you're not just one. You're many. You have 50 billion neurons. You have trillions of cells, and all of those have infinite potentials for connecting to each other. Quadrillion times quadrillion, probably. So the actual waveform that we probably normally experience would be, it would sound something like this. It sounds rougher, in a way. Or this is a sawtooth wave, and this is a square wave. Okay, so if I combine all these together, this is what our brains sound like, more or less. Even when you're in slow wave sleep, a lot of the waveforms that we emit are in fact looking more like sawtooth than sine wave. So to achieve a sine wave quality, we need to go more into like this right here, to go as low as 4 hertz or even lower. It's almost like you need to undergo a kind of death process in order to slow down your brain waves to the point where you really kind of go deep. So imagine if this was death or sleep. What would it take for you to experience sleep? It would mean you have to wake up during sleep, but you're not awake, which is here. You're still sleeping, but you're awake within sleep. And probably the only way I can describe that is you would wake up in a world where time doesn't exist. Everything's happening all at once. And when you start moving, opening your eyes, moving from here to here and here, you start to experience 3-dimensional, awake, normal consciousness where everything's now happening one at a time. Okay, so somehow we're balancing this, and so I'm pretty sure Flor has brought you into this configuration already. If not, she will. This is what our brain looks like when we go to sleep. So this basically are the sleep stages. So why do we sleep is one of the questions. One of the reasons why we sleep is actually to wake something up. It just sounds so ironic. We go to sleep to wake something up. And what is that? It's this part right here. It's the dream state. Okay, so what is the dream? When our eyes are going into rapid movements, when we're sleeping, what is it? So space is that. Space is where you can pack in a lot more information within any point in time, as opposed to the linear time unfolding where things take place one at a time. Here. In space, everything is simultaneous, synchronous, and so in a way, for us to move back to the dream space, we need to find a way to go into parallel processing, what happens in the right brain that is not the function of the left brain, which likes things neatly sequenced, like in language you speak, like one word at a time. That's how we experience the day. 1 second comes after the other. Here's a minute. That's going to be followed by another minute that anticipates another minute after that. So it's almost like we're remembering a time when space dominated more than time itself, or becoming space that is coming from time. And this is not something we need to learn. We actually do it every night. If you're not doing it, you're dead already, because the dream state happening during sleep is the ideal state. It's the original state. It's the origins. It's when we talk about source, that is the space in which like everything was one. That's why I do appreciate somewhat this kind of figure, because there seems to be these dualities that could come into to oneness. So maybe here is a duality of the body that would find oneness in the space of consciousness. Like the mind integrates what the body keeps in polarizations. And the dualities of thought or of the mind in some ways are held in a unitive state through the point of view of the body. It's really, really paradoxical. Like the body likes to integrate what the mind separates, and the mind likes to always integrate what the body separates. And they're always in conversation with each other. So in many ways, the biggest tool that allowed us to integrate what the body separates is language itself. So say when you think of a word, I'm really sorry I left my writing tablets, so I'm just writing with my cursor. When you think of a word, what's a word? Say your name is possibly a word, like Marita or Flor, I don't know your other names. That's a word. What's inside that word? What's the essence of that word? It's a sound, but what actually is contained in that sound? So the mind learned to define, which is to make definite, which is to make finite, what in fact was super duper infinite. So that's one of the reasons why we are going back to the body. That's why we're dropping down to the body, because in some ways the body integrates um, vibrations very, very differently from the way the mind integrates sensorial experiences within these. So this is the reason why sometimes when you go into an experience of energy, it's very hard to name and define things within these semantic containers that are innovations that took place thousands, tens of thousands years ago, when society needed to organize itself somehow so we could trade, barter, and negotiate meanings, intentions. So we take a rest from that. If, let's say, a lot of those negotiations take place in beta consciousness, where we're planning, solving problems, analyzing, thinking things in a linear way, which is vibratory. There's a certain vibe. To get to this point, we actually need to let go of the slower waves, the more relaxed waves, the parasympathetic waves. When we open our eyes, we live here in the sympathetic, problem-solving, over-planning nervous system. So the question is, like, what is the goal? Like, what are we actually trying to do? In a way, there is a lot of truth in that we are trying to go higher. This is gamma. We are trying to go higher, but what is revealed is for you to embody this, what's called the flow state, you in fact need to slow something down. So it's almost like you need to borrow something within the delta that's hiding. Delta is in fact hiding the gamma frequencies. And when you combine delta and gamma, this is very often the experience, the completion. I think this looked better in the completion of gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. And there's a lot more. Beyond gamma, there's high oscillating frequencies. There's somewhere here, there's the mu frequency, the sensory motor rhythms, and the lambda, the epsilon waves. So in a way, we actually had to negotiate the letting go of a lot of those waves when we had to take care of the kids, to go to the bank, to manage our Instagram accounts, need to, and evolutionary speaking, this might be interesting from a Middle Eastern perspective. It is actually literacy, the age of the book, modernity visioning creatures, as opposed to when we were more tribal. Through oral tradition, we listened to each other. We looked at each other, and now when
your signal is not
connection, yeah.
going up a little bit, so maybe a bit slower.
Okay. So sorry about that. Yeah, I got the notice that the connection's unstable. So one of the explanations for what we are doing right now is if we had to give up the ear for the eye, one of the things inner dance is doing is we're moving back from the eye to the ear. And when you think of Africa and when you think of the Middle East, these are regions in the world that are holding on to vibratory origins a lot longer than the West. I wouldn't count Dubai there because Dubai is very, very westernized. But Africa and the Middle East are places in the world that are still in what's called residual orality, where it's not really just about sound per se. It's about how do we organize our consciousness. And in tribal consciousness, the collective, the group, is much, much more important than the individual. In Western societies, the identity, the individual is a lot more important. So the ear is a tool for listening and thinking from the group space. So what we're finding is there are certain ways of allowing that to happen, just by, let's say, Flor could probably do this better. I'm not really a good artist, but when we lay down and when we close our eyes, something happens to waves where we're not hearing the sound so much just from our ears, our auditory cortex. We're actually hearing the sound through the whole body, because sound becomes experienced through transverse waves when we're laying down. We can actually hear the sound through our cells, not just through a very small part of the brain called the auditory cortex. So going back to these, so inner dance then would be very combinatory. Let me give you one example. So if I was to, it doesn't sound very harmonious if I play this in this way. It's a bit noisy. Let me just hear. Let me add the voices here. So like more voices. From simple to complex, from one to many, from one to many. Say, let's look at a song example. What's beautiful about this track is it starts out very slow, very simple, very much, singular voice in the synthesized sound here in the background, and then more, and then more. It's like a build-up. So when we go back to the picture of the brain, really inner dance is just the ability to create a global spreading out of what is called neural oscillations. The original inner dance elements would mostly spread electricity here, maybe here, a lot here, and here. So I think Flor's been taking you through different modalities of the sound, and more especially here, movement. What takes place in some interesting new ways we are using sound is you can spread things out more here. So the irony there is when the body isn't actually moving so much anymore and you're experiencing less emotion, you will get to that point where, okay, what happened again? I don't remember anything, but it seems like a lot happened. This is a global spread across the whole brain. In epilepsy, that's called a generalized seizure as opposed to a focalized seizure. So when you then learn these musical forms, the kind of sounds you choose, whether you're playing the instrument or choosing a song, determines the spread. And what the circadian rhythms is saying in this point is it takes a certain journey to get here. Before we can handle complexity, which maybe in an ecological perspective is what you call diversity, neurological diversity, like linguistic diversity, the space in which all languages become audible to you because you're hearing the vibrations, not just the words, which is what babies hear and speak. To travel from just here, then adding like a lot more of these, we somehow are creating a completion of what became really like particular, very, worried, super focused. Yeah, you could start a corporation, you could raise kids, but what you're realizing is we're actually losing resources that are hiding within trans-dimensional elements that's hiding within this super fast and this super slow, which dimensionally is holding so much more data, it's holding so much more information. So what else could we... So yeah, I think maybe let's move to my phone. It's easier to demonstrate things through here. Maybe Flor shared some things already. So whenever someone shows you their machine, it's very intimate because they're showing you their brain. So this is what my brain kind of looks like from an inner dance space. When I facilitate inner dance, I use these to organize my sounds. So one of the simplest tools that I use is it's this DJ app. Okay, so I'm playing just one sound. I like to use this one because when you look at this clock here, it says it's 60 minutes long. It's an hour long, and it really just features like a heartbeat and a lot of the sounds that you might hear if you're in the womb with some music played over. And because my definition of inner dance is that we're actually going back to the womb, not literally the part of the woman's body that can construct human beings, but more of the consciousness of the origins of life. So I could speak easily to a room when I just play that. But what I like about this particular app with that song is I could change the heartbeat here. You press the button of tempo, I can control the rhythm here. So let's say that's happening. I can slow down time, and we can speed up time. And I normally would just put on like another track here, just long ones that I don't have to change. So every time I want to add more layers, I don't really have to press too much buttons. So I just want you to notice the difference. If it's this alone, that's one thing. If I press both buttons together, it's a different feeling. And all I'm doing right now is creating like a metaphor for what it means to build more layers, stacking more vibrations as opposed to just holding one. sequentially. So, okay, I do this one, and then I do this one, and it goes up, it raises up, it goes up, it goes up. So the old inner dance style was actually quite linear, where it goes here, and goes here, and goes here. When we learn to hold more layers, even in the beginning of a process, then throughout the whole thing, you could mix up the different stages of awakening. Let's clean that up a little bit. It's really going to be up to you how much you want to add to the layers. So let's say I'm using this in the background. And so this is a library of noises. Understanding noises are vibrations, then helping the brain to go back to diversity. Put a pause to that. I want you to notice the feeling of suddenly receiving rhythm. That's arrhythmic. There's no beat in that. Just notice how awareness changes in transition between different rhythms and harmonies. Rhythm In music, rhythm organizes time. So suddenly when you hear this, that rhythm is a dimension. It's a dimension. It holds a dimensionality. That when I go back to this, we can move through different dimensions. This is what the heart does. We move from the dimension of excitement, terror, safety, trust, excitement, terrified, love, dream, deep observation, focus. Yeah, it's really actually quite simple when it's demonstrated visually what people are experiencing deep down. Here's something more complex. This is like a Launchpad app, and once again, I have like a library of stuff here. I don't even know what some of these sound like. So that just sounds like a party. Okay, what I'm demonstrating with this now is some big rule or law in inner dance playlisting. It's called the law of contrast, where there is a sharp difference between what is high and what is low. So, and just let me know if you can't see my screen. I'm doing a screen share of my desktop. So for example, when you hear, say, something like this, okay, so that's a very sequential drop. From somewhere high, you move into somewhere low. So if you simply heard this on its own, it just sounds meditative. But when it's a drop from this one, what actually happens there is when you move from like high tempo to very slow non-rhythmic space, this is what brings out gamma, because sorry, because of the drop, it's the contrast between anger and forgiveness, joy and sadness, that allows us to remember the space in which there is no actual difference between these between dark and light, between the day and the night, which circadian rhythms kind of separated and organized through living on Earth for a really, 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 really long time. You can imagine what we're doing. We're actually changing something super duper old almost overnight. People who lay down and experience this very, very different circadian rhythmicity. You're changing something really, really old, like super duper fast. So I think this should be already quite interesting for us to have a conversation. This is a summation of what inner dance looks like between mostly theory and practice. There are philosophies of inner dance, but that takes like a lot more space to unravel. Theory is interesting because theory really grounds practice. There's so much separation between what we do and what we know, so that what we're doing here is we're bringing in different elements in the understanding of language, of thought, consciousness, the mind, and the brain. So you can't actually know how to facilitate if you don't know what's happening. When you know what's happening, you instantly would know what to do. Certain ways of touching people, holding certain body parts with the awareness, you actually would know what to do. So I'm going to close with that, and let's maybe take a short break because I need to go to the toilet. I drank a lot of water today. And maybe you want to do the same, either to take some water or tea, or let's maybe do 3 minutes. All right, see you soon. Okay, so I think I'm good now. You guys ready? Think you're muted. Just take your time, just whenever you're good.
Ah, thank you, Clive.
Mm.
Hi,
Hello.
Saudi body.
my name is Dalia. It's nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being here with us. Um, it's not so much a question, it's more of an understanding that focusing during the time that we had yesterday. Today.
I'm sorry, I can't really hear that well. I don't want to respond to like garble because I wouldn't be able to respond at all. Yeah, just closer.
Can you hear me more clearly?
Yes.
Mhm.
Just speak slow and louder. Yeah.
Um, I would love to hear more from you about what I'm about to unpack. Um, Taking the imagery of the brain in the different sensory areas and seeing how the layering of the music covers a lot of detail. So that's one element. And then there's another element of the Dakota country and the convergence of the electricity and the magnetism and the emphasis on the center point and then the expansion and then the contraction and for me, these are all beautiful symbolism. It's the micro of the macro. How do you see inner dance, or is inner dance? How do you see it in the merging or the connection between the polarity universe that we are engaged in, where contrast, cause and effect, karma, so on and so forth, like nice and good. I really look at that as polarity universe. And then the realm of the absolute, which is outside of free, which is not bound by the laws of karma, so on and so forth, but really is the connection web where the blueprint of perfect self exists, where the blueprint of compassion. I would love to hear your insight on how inner dance changes reality.
Okay. What I love about what you just shared was it wasn't a question. You actually unraveled, or no, you defined inner dance already, and what you are looking for is an affirmation of what is so present in you already. That when you speak in this way, there's so much resonance with what you are realizing now. The concept of like providing the non-duality, the non-difference, sounds so simple, like in a way, like we're bridging duality and non-duality, which is kind of paradoxical in a way. The moment you say duality, there's already a difference between duality and non-duality. So the moment you say, I want to experience non-duality, but there is a duality to the non-duality. So when we approach paradox in this way that we can ground it and make it real, I think there's something here about intensity and going into the extreme. I think this is going to be a natural question that comes up again and again. Do we have to go through crisis, the dark night of the soul, in order to find light within the dark, the white within the black? I don't know the answer to that, but having observed this inside myself, upon experiencing the emergence of this inside my own body and then across the world through tens of thousands of bodies, vibrationally, I think there's something about the inside and the outside. So when we are experiencing a lower vibration from within, say when our vibration is low, outside of us time speeds up. Time's faster. So in a way, when we're dominated by the clock, one of the illusions perpetuated upon us is, I don't have time. There's not enough time. That's descriptive of the event where time outside is faster. So that when we vibrate faster inside, what happens is time actually slows down. So that suddenly we're observing the world as if it was a picture, like a space. And we can explore that space outside of our judgments, outside of our emotional, reactive tendencies. And in that we can actually love the world and the parts of the world with objectivity, not just through subjectivity. It's like to see the world as it truly is. I wouldn't put the second as above the first, because in a way, everything outside of us is a reflection of what is inside of us. So still looking for that middle space, the ideal would be we want to vibrate equally what is inside and outside, because the self is just as much co-creating the universe as the other. I think a huge part of our suffering is we're trying to create each other, and the other could be nature. Humans are trying to control nature from the mythical or indigenous or tribal sense. Nature creates us. We come from nature, but modernity would have it the other way around. We're creating nature. We're causing nature. So we don't know how to create this equilibrium. So I think to bring more layers to where we're coming from, we need a societal or intersubjective way of understanding duality and non-duality. So we're having to go beyond the current dimensionality into what might look like the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh dimension. And time wouldn't look the same in that sense. So were we to enter that in a more complex way, we don't have a current understanding of where we're going, because it's not something we've experienced before. Let's say the chimpanzee, the bonobo, our ancestors, the early humans, we were seeing the world in a certain dimensionality. And then when we became human, we entered into what is the current dimensionality. So, because now we're entering into a different dimension of time and space, things are becoming less familiar. So we need a new way of relating to even old concepts, old thoughts, old symbols, old words. They don't have to go away, what is old. We just need to see it from a different way, a different vibration. So what's taking place now is we're building an energy literacy. Literacy is normally what we would think about as, okay, I know how to read now, where before I just knew how to listen. We're now learning to read the energy book. So we need to sensitize ourselves. So I think where duality and non-duality comes in is there's something wounded about language. So when we are using these word sequences and sentences and paragraphs, it's like we're always trying to arrive at a point. And there's something very paradoxical about that the more you try to arrive at the point, when we're using words, we're actually pushing meaning away. That's called displacement, as opposed to the ability of the mind to go into deeper time perceptions in the dream state, the spiritual awakening, the psychedelic awareness, or near death. When we die, what happens is we can condense like a lot into just the one thing. So you can experience that in inner dance. Sometimes you suddenly experience everything as if it was like an energy field or a ball of energy, and it's like you can see everything all at once in one like space, and that's called condensation. That's the opposite of displacement. So something I'm interested in as a philosophical and a theoretical inquiry, which means to either look at it from a spiritual, philosophical, or scientific way. Here's a question. What did reality look like before we were born? And then, what would it, whatever you want to call it, life, the universe, what would it look like after you are done here, after you die? Would the world go away? would it still be there, but would you see it from a different point of view? It would simply be another dimensionality. I don't believe in death. So how I experienced death when I did several times in my spiritual journey is you don't actually die. You're still inside this energy ball. Everything is non-linear, and you can go into any part of the same life anytime you want. It could be like any day, when you're 3 years old, when you're 30 years old, and all of the potentials are present within that one life, which is the energy ball. You don't actually live a life. That life exists permanently somewhere in an ocean of these life bubbles, this whole sea of entities that are infinite in and of themselves. That heals us when we even think about that. It's like, oh, okay, this heart, this essence is here forever. I don't have to be in this illusion that time is limited, like, which is based on the illusion that death could actually happen. So there's this whole cascade of emotion, judgment, illusion, like everything is separate, nothing is connected, leads to judgment, leads to the embodiment of fear, and it began with separation, which was instituted in us maybe when we were like a few days old, a few weeks, a few months, and then we kept hearing this word that you started to associate as your name that separates you. I'm not my mom, I'm not my dad, my brother, my sister, I'm not my neighbor, I'm me. I'm separate from everyone else. So we start to embody that. We start to hold that one vibration. So I think what's happening now is we're wanting to experience what is not that. To be all of the other things that's not you means a complete paradoxical holding of the split. And so I think one of the questions being asked, and it's inside what you were asking, how do we enter that? It would mean the experience of a whole universe in each and every part of it. Like each person holds a universe. Each word holds a universe. Each day is a universe. And the only way you can hear that or see that in a sound or an image is to be that. You can't hear it unless you became it. You have to become a universe to see the universe everywhere. And so vibrationally, I think we cannot really believe that unless we experience it, which is why we're holding the work we're holding. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was really tired. I was really
Mm.
remember. So something about light and sound. Where is sound?
Which one came first? Where is light and the sound?
Yeah, there is.
There was a can
You're unmuted.
muted and mute.
It's good.
There was a question that came earlier, and I remember that with regard to the relationship of light and sound. Where is light and sound?
Yeah.
And it was a really good sharing. Dr. Beautiful.
So you guys want me to go a little bit into this topic? Is it? Okay. I really love this topic. I think this is an anthropological topic, and what we're really talking about is the media. When you think of the word media, we think of the technological devices that we're using, but media is not just media. Media is the medium. So the medium is the channel. And when you change the channel, the information will change. A lot of people are interested in the information. It's not about the information, it's about the medium. When you shift from one medium to another medium, you will experience the same information differently. So, and I'm sure a lot of you are like Flor, artists. A lot of people who enter the energy process are artists. Some of you are interested in the art of the movement. That's called the dance. The art of sound is called music. The art of the image is called painting or sculpture. Everything in the visual arts, whether it be photography and so on and so forth. When you experience energy, something interesting that happens is translation. Somehow the poet is translating what the dancer is translating that came from the movie, that came from the song, that came from, so internally we're all of those artists, and we're constantly translating. We're constantly translating. So when I first experienced inner dance on the beach, my body exploded in this amazing dimension of movement, and the word said, "The mother and I are now one." And then after I began to move in a really intense way, the word said, "It began in Africa." And then I exploded in this light language, something, my voice began to go into a whole range of vibrations. Super fast, super slow, high, low. I can't describe it to you. It just felt like I was this drum of many, many, many drums, and each of the percussive sounds had harmonies and harmonics, inharmonics, melodies, and it was just weird. It's like I spoke everything in a few minutes, and my body was just this generator of sound. So it took me a long time to understand what Africa is. And for me, Africa is not like a country or a continent. Africa is a memory within us when we were not different from each other. So in a way, put those two statements together, the mother and I are now one. In a sense, Africa is the mother. So from Africa, think of, let's say, Mesopotamia, Babylon, which brings in the Middle East, as a memory of the source. The old memories are there where you are right now. So then think of Egypt. Egypt was a memory of when we were translating sound into the hieroglyphic, image-based, meaning-making process. Each hieroglyph, which is an image, contains all of the sounds and all of the movements that we've ever experienced. So think of Phoenicia, which is maybe where Iran, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, allows us to trade with Europe, trade with Asia, the Middle East being in the middle, we then came into an agreement where the phonetic system would start to allow us to trade with each other. We call it the alphabet. It's the phonetic system. That's where trade, barter, economics really started to flourish. Before that, we didn't have a conventional understanding, so we could trade with each other. So think of that. It's like we now can write down the sounds in what are in the phonetic system, 26 sounds. We call them the A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I, we made this agreement that when I make that sound, that's what it means. And suddenly, when you can put all of those sounds together, you can you can then create meanings that would be shared across the world. That for me is just like mind-blowing. It's like, whoa, we were sound, and then we condensed, almost materialized what is vibration into stone. And a lot of that was based on the history of mediumship. Orality is the age in which we were using sound to exchange meanings with each other. And when we learned to store that vibration outside of the body, in the beginning we were painting these in the caves, art. What was the beginning of this? We were doing cave paintings. We were learning to put them on rocks, these meanings, these sounds. And then what makes Egypt important is the movement from Mesopotamia, the cuneiform. This belongs to your histories. I mean, that's where it was happening. We were writing on clay. We were writing in clay, and so we were storing our vibration into clay, into mud, into rocks, so that we could store information. And when we were learning to do that, the mind was evolving. We were developing the eyes. We were shifting from vibration and sound to image, so we could trade with each other. Economics was important, so that before this trading mechanism, it is very difficult to bring value, societally speaking. How do you say to someone, okay, my 3 days worth of work is equal to that cow, or to trade that sheep with, I can't think of anything else. It's figs or olives, I don't know what's there. You needed a way to trade, and before these symbols existed, we couldn't trade, we couldn't negotiate, we couldn't talk to each other in this way. Even language is a way of trading meanings. So in that part of the world you're in, that's where we started to trade energies with each other. And we needed to develop the eyes, we needed to develop literacy. I mean, the numerical system came from the Arabic system. It's a Middle Eastern invention, like numbers as we use it now, came from there. So what we did was we learned to refine that. From concrete, body-based experience, we created thought, abstract thought. From the body, the experience of the body, then it becomes an abstract thought. That happens from an evolutionary perspective, the species, and that needs to happen in the brain and mind of a child. When a child learns to grow into a persona, receiving culture, language, going to school, they need to shift from sound to image. So when you take on a word actually had to be mediated by the image. So think of the difference between the hieroglyphic Egyptian writing tradition to the phonetic system. In Egypt, for you to write down meaning, the picture or the image was holding the entire word. But something happened in the phonetic system where the letter is a sound image. A hieroglyphic unit is a word image. So now think of Chinese writing, and there are many other writing traditions that are more logographic. We had to change our brain from right brain thinking into left brain thinking. So now we can combine sounds to make up a word, which is like really advanced if you think about it. Like, how do you create meaning out of B-A-B-Y or F-O-O-D or P-L-A-N-T? It required that we go into a dimensionality of consciousness that packs in so much history into each sound. So in a way, the sounds that we use stores so many images. It holds so many images so that when you lay down and when you experience the music, the images start to appear as colors, shapes, geometries, and then images. Those images are storing a lot of sounds. It just boggles your mind. It's like the sounds actually contain the images, the infinite images. And all of these images contain all of the sounds. For us to have come here, we had to do this. We had to construct a whole universe within the paradox of the sound and the image. Like in and of themselves, the actual meanings are held within what's called the network. None of the sounds, none of the images mean anything alone. For us to have created the possibility of life, just like in the Big Bang, at the moment of the bang, which is a sound, at the moment of the bang, 99.7% of the universe is like, boom, it was suddenly created. So that everything suddenly existed all together, all at once, in this universal simultaneity. We didn't create it slowly, one at a time, like brick by brick. Okay, how do I construct this? Inside that one small point was almost everything that would ever exist. So that nothing could exist in and of itself. It needed a room in order to experience itself because it was bored. It's like, okay, I'm purity, I'm light, I'm God, I'm goddess. It's so boring. I can't experience myself. So for me to experience myself, I have to become very, 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 very small in conjunction with all of the other small things. So it's almost like what we're doing now is we want to remember the super duper duper big, which is hiding inside the super small. So there's a structure or construct where the big is actually made of many, many small things. But when you look at the super small, inside each super small is actually like something very big. And you can just keep going back and forth. Flor knows this. When I hold inner dance, these are the ways I guide people. Like choose one small point. And as people enter the small point, boom, there's a whole universe inside that one small point. And then when they make another choice on going into another like doorway that goes into another room, we're actually the process. We're not the room. We're not the being in the room. What we are is a process of moving from inside and out, up and down, big and small, one and many. So somehow, for us to get here, we had to design that construct. And we're really just remembering what that structure is. So one of the harvests that you will receive isn't going to be personal. It's not going to be just a memory or a trauma. What you're receiving is planetary or universal or cosmic as to how do you even construct like a universe. That's where you kind of get the blueprint. There's a very big difference between the question like who are you and what are you? And right now there are many more answers to the second question, so that who are you will just be arbitrary. It depends on what you ate for breakfast, what someone says to you. Sometimes we're taking things too personally. So the insights that we're interested in is like, how do I take things universally so that someone says something to me and say, okay, that's great. And someone then does something awful to you and say, okay, that's okay too. You don't know the difference anymore between this and that. It all just becomes like a one thing, which you're now kind of embodying inside yourself. So one of the sciences that will come out that will be important is sound and image. And how you want to ground that, if you're not just remembering the story of you, is that humanity has a story. But if we weren't just like this as humans, what are we actually? To start to embody history, which for many of you should not be a history, it should be a herstory. To embody herstory, you need to have a narrative of something, a story of all stories. And one lasting study area would be, what is the story of dimensionality? And something I've just took you through is the story of media, story of channel, story of... So to take you through a quick history of that, from cave paintings to the cuneiform, to the Egyptian papyrus, and then to paper. Before paper, it was actually parchment, which is dead animal skin, because it lasted longer. And then we discovered paper, and then printing, and then computers. These are all symbolic representations of the dimensions of mind. So there's actually a story of dimensionality that grows through the evolution of media. So don't ever think that it's just the internet and computers and iPhones and whatnot. They're actually dimensional elements that's able to hold more and more information or memory. So something's happening to the brain that's entering into these dimensions, and inner dance emerges at the time of technology in concert. It's all happening at the same time. Meditation and energy healing in a 22nd century will not look the same as many thousands of years ago. So keep asking yourself these really interesting questions, like what did the world look like to the caveman? How did they perceive information? What's interesting now is, from orality to literacy, and when we discovered computers, which is electronic thought, we're actually becoming tribal again. When you study media, media is really all about feedback. So when we were using speech as tribes, when you use sound, the speaker always has to be present. And when we discovered writing, what was interesting about the book is the speaker could store him or herself so that they don't need to be present during the time of the exchange. Now, this held a lot of power, so that the priest, the author, holds a lot of authority. So when you think of the sacred scripture, you could control masses of people. I'm not going to say that's a negative. In a way, that helped to organize society that was experiencing so much chaos. But it also allowed for colonization. It allowed for control, so that you can manipulate people through that invention. Because in the book, the information stream is really one way. You cannot talk to the author because the author is not there. There's no mediation. There's a mediation happening so that information could travel. So what the book did, not just the book, but what our ability to store information outside did, was we solidified the vibration. That's what the image does. We solidified the information so it doesn't go away. So think of speech. When you're saying something, even as you're saying it, even as you're giving birth to the meaning's already dying. Do you understand? Even as you're saying it, there's already a death happening, even as a birth is happening word per word. So that when you look at Instagram, Facebook, social media, when people are taking pictures of this and that, it's almost a way of storing parts of ourselves so that we won't die. One of the reasons why people are so obsessed with the image is we're afraid of death. So we can immortalize an energy just by creating an image of it. But when it becomes a sound, then actually there's this possibility for death. That's the relationship between sound and image. Sound holds death. The image holds permanence. So in a way, we're almost afraid of becoming sound again, because that means we're going to be flowing. We don't know. You can't control a sound in as much as we can control an image. So it's all about feedbacks, like how we can get answers to what is being sent out, input and output. Something electronic mediums were able to do, especially the internet, is it allowed people to allow two-way streams to happen. So when they send something out, they can receive a reply, which wasn't happening in the age of literacy, where many school traditions came from. And it's changing the brain, so that it's not, the response mechanism isn't two-way anymore. We're receiving and sending out so much, and these inventions are super new. The internet is new. It happened in our lifetime. Computers, cell phones, they're new. So people are not asking really functional, good, spiritual questions about these technologies. Like, how did Facebook change the brain more than any other invention known to man? How did the Steve Jobs inventions of the personal computer, cell phones, how did it change our brain? People are not asking these questions, even though the change has already happened. And I think inner dance holds a key. So don't think of inner dance as a spiritual modality. Suddenly think of it as a technology. What if it was a medium? What if it was a dimensionality? What if inner dance was the concert of all of the art forms all together? You know, think of it. The images are still there even though people's eyes are closed. Touch is there. All of the senses come together. It's all of the spiritual disciplines all rolled into one. You can have your yoga, your breath work, you can have your shamanism, your meditation, you can have your party, all roll it into one. It's not just about sound and image, it's about all of the senses. Because, you know, when you look at senses from science, historical science, we're supposed to have 5 senses, right? What you hear, what you smell, what you can feel through touch, what you can taste, and what you can see. But right now, science is confused with the fact that there are now hundreds of senses being tracked. The sense of pain, pleasure, the sense of electricity, magnetism, the sense of balance. So when you go into the energy experience, you actually sense everything together yet separately, so that you're isolating each of the senses. There's a heightened sense, and you can see it all like separate, but they're all also rolled into one. even just by me saying this, I invite you to experience that once you're there. Some of the new musical forms of spirit are going to let you isolate those experiences intact, not just as a like mud where everything's just like splattered all together. There's a more refined way of experiencing the energy. So forgive me for such a long answer. Some of these questions are not small questions, they're really ginormous inquiries, sound and image.
I don't know how long. Yeah, okay. Hi, Pai. Actually, I was going to ask a question about the relationship between the sound and the sacred geometry, but you just mentioned it. Now, moving forward, because I saw it yesterday when we did the inner dance here, my journey started with working with sacred geometry, and then it moved more. And something that I want to ask about, which is moving forward with the sacred geometry, what about the Fibonacci and the pi and the phi as well? How we link it to the inner dance to make it more maybe stronger, or maybe it's inside the inner dance. This is question number one. A second question, how we can teach the kids about this. So this is very important, especially for the kids who live here in Dubai. They don't have connection with nature at all, and it's so hard to convince them with the system. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. I'm going to be casual with this because I'm actually bad at mathematics up until now, and geometry is a part of math. But there are wisdom elements in inner dance that can brush against this. So it's up to us to collaborate with the scientists to look at this. I think historically, let me bring up the screen again. Let's start another one. I mean, sacred geometry was here. So we could look at this. I have this tattooed on my chest as well. I think sacred geometry in any form whatsoever is a... sorry, I'm using my cursor so it's clumsy. It bears relationships between the part and the whole. So when you look at like each part, there's a sense of a relationship between all the other parts. So we see coherence between the part and the whole. So that each part holographically contains like the whole. So that, like historically, we've always tried to hold the geometry of a belief structure. So let's say from different evolutions in our conceptions of time and space, we used to think maybe that the center of the universe was like where I live. And then we started to get a sense that, okay, there's actually like an earth. There's this round thing called the earth. So that we had a geocentric model of the world. And then we realized, okay, but there's that bright thing that comes up during the day. So that we had to come up with a heliocentric version of the universe. And we mathematically computed that oh no, the universe is not revolving around the universe is not revolving around the earth. The earth is actually going around this thing called the sun. And that broke us, in a way. That broke our ego. So when we were still living within a geocentric model of the universe, then we could still be the middle of it all. Suddenly we realize, no, we're not in the middle. Like, we're just like a part of like the whole. So then there are other centrisms, like theocentrism would have it that God is the center of the universe. We're moving across many, many centrisms. Anthropocentrism says the human is the middle of the universe. And what you mentioned is, no, nature is forgotten somehow. Nature somehow holds more center than the human. But in many places like Singapore or in Dubai, very much the human needs to be the center because nature is harsh. We need to control nature. So humans are more important. There's a great imbalance of this that's not being held within school systems, hospital systems, political or economic systems. It wasn't very convenient to hold a larger space. So I think what's happening now from a sacred geometrical perspective is there's this new centrism called omnicentrism, which is strange geometry that states that everyone is the center of the universe. So from the Fibonacci point of view, I think this still brings us back to the first question regarding electricity and magnetism. There's a Fibonacci jump when we look at the measurement of electricity and magnetism in the world. It's almost like magnetism, which is what holds things together, is decreasing. And the average Hertz level, physicists were measuring the electricity in the universe. It was revolving around between 7 and 8 Hertz. And then what's happening now is the electricity quotient is increasing to somewhere between 12 and 13 Hertz. And what that means is the vibration is going higher and magnetism is going lower. Think about change. What happens when change happens? If magnetism holds form, probably like economics, earthquakes, political upheavals will take place. Climate change will happen when magnetism is reduced. So there's an actual Fibonacci jump in the very measurement of electricity and magnetism. So that when you look at sacred geometry, going back to this, I think what the flower of life and the seed of life hold, which you can find in very ancient temples in the Middle East, in Europe and in Asia, is we used to be here in the middle. This is the seed of life, sol, which is an Egyptian word for the sun. So there's a 7 here.
Hi, your screen is not shared.
Oh, yeah, sorry. That's true. In the middle of the seed is the 7 circles, right? And, that's special to me. I was born on July 7, 1976, 7776. I've been looking at what does the 7 mean. 7 colors in the rainbow, 7, notes in the major and minor musical scale, 7 days of the week. So when you look at this figure, there's 12 circles surrounding the number 7. There's 12 circles outside. So when you look at this, people meditate on it, they wonder, what does that mean? For me, that's a calendar. There's 7 days of the week, there's 12 months in the year. So when you look at that, that's actually looking at the very structure of time itself. So the number 12 in a way is actually the number 13. Because what makes this 7 is that there's 6 circles around the center one, the number 7. So this brings us into a very non-hierarchical point of view of the colors. Because when you look at the color wheel, say you have these 6 circles. Let's say this is messy. Let's just make a new one. This is going to be really, really messy and non-artistic because my cursor doesn't allow me to make good drawings. So let's say this is the color chart, and artists would know that for you to create a secondary color, you need to combine 2 primary colors together. So for you to make orange, you need to combine red and yellow. For you to create green, you need to combine yellow and blue, which are 2 primary colors. And for you to create this one is indigo, you have to create red. You have to combine red and blue. So the question is, how do you combine the thing in the middle? What comprises violet? So literally, when you look at the color wheel, the color chart, for you to create violet, you need to take some of this. It's called white. And then you need to combine that with indigo. And because white is the combination of all colors, not the absence, but the combination of all colors, violet holographically actually contains all of the colors within a middle space, right? So in a way, sacred geometry is omnicentric, where you can choose any one point in all of these, and no matter where you go, even if you expand to all of these different points, they keep going back to the middle. So artistically, when you look at the art forms in the Orient, in Asia, when you look at the mandala, in a mandala, no matter where you look, like in India, Tibet, Nepal, your eyes just keep going back to the center. So everything is in the middle. That's what sacred geometry, I think, does, not just from a religious standpoint, but there's science in this. The Platonic forms are all within the seed of life geometry, and I think there's a science in terms of the number 7 and the number 13. I don't know if you understood why it's the number 13. It's because there's 12 circles or petals in the flower, and when you add the 12 with the one in the middle, you actually arrive at the number 13, which looks at time not from the Gregorian calendar. The cycles in the Mayan calendar is the number 13. And when you study the Mayan calendar, you get the Egyptian symbol, of the snake or the serpent that's eating its own tail, which is called the Ouroboros, or circular time, where the end is the beginning is the end. So I think, to answer your question, nature is just the forests, not just the desert. Is the structure of consciousness, which is sound and image. And I think if children are taught the structure of their own consciousness, I think that is the school. So what we've been doing in the inner dance community is we've been exposing children. This is very, very recent, but we've been exposing young children to the playlist. Okay, this is very exciting. Let me talk about this a little bit. This will excite you, Marita, I know. It didn't occur to us to expose very emotionally distressed children to inner dance music, not in a workshop, but while they're sleeping. So we've been designing these 2 or 3 hour playlists that are very gentle. They still have the spikes, they still have the intense triggers, but we hide them behind a lot of delta noises. And we're actually quite shocked at the feedbacks that we've been getting from around the world. Very, very recently, just in the last weeks, you have these mothers, And fathers, some of them are actually like medical practitioners. They've been exposing children to this, and suddenly children who were like wetting their beds, who are angry, who are super duper distressed or experiencing ADHD, we've been logging in the feedbacks, and there's this incredible overnight recovery of these kids simply by bringing them back to a natural circadian rhythmicity. I don't know where this is going, but I feel that if parents and teachers simply got to the bottom of this, there's so much empowerment, because it's so terrifying for a parent to lose control over the well-being of a child. And then they turn to medicine, they turn to psychiatrists. They don't know what to do. The intervention is usually reductive and materialistic. It's medical, it's pharmaceutical, because that's how we control, through chemicals. But giving parents at least the power to do something, and if the solution is in fact like sound, to take hold of the vibration of their children's bedrooms, the brain of the child, so that they could return back to the origins. This is just like, it's so simple, it's so obvious, but we didn't think about it before. That if we are holding a mirror of the circadian rhythms, how can we bring sound back to what is too imaginative and narcissistic and image-based, too linear, too reductive? How can we bring back the vibration in the lives of the children who were born as universes and who were treated as persons? So I do believe that schooling system has been hiding within the inner dance process. Very limited what's been happening in the energy that's been traveling across the world. People have been taking the inner dance and changing the name, rebranding it, and calling it these, Indian sounding terms without really understanding what it does. The imbalance there is it's become just a way of activating the addictive dopamine cycle in us. The old ways of conducting the music was really, really good at bringing pleasure, bringing heart palpitation, and but there was spiritual addiction on the way as people oversimplified the process. So what we're learning is that there are ways to spread the activation of the energy in the brain and the whole central nervous system, so that if it's not just about the explosion of these body movements that a lot of people like to call the kundalini, it's the greatest transformations are in fact happening when the body stops moving. And there's a moving from the addictive pathways to the learning pathways. What is strange is that those two pathways are not complementary usually. The dopaminergic pathway inhibits the glutamatergic pathway, which balances with GABA. Glutamate and GABA facilitates learning, and when people are experiencing just the dopamine release that opens up like these brain centers usually in the spiritual awakening, but when there's anticipation, expectation, desire, want, need, experience seeking, people actually just go back to the cycle of addiction. I could go into the sciences of that, but it's not. We don't have the space. But there are videos that we're sharing online and open source that can help you review that. For you to move into learning, you actually need to commit to different pathways. And so some of the differentiations in the music that Flor has been sharing to you is about actually bringing applications of inner dance, not just in the yoga studio or the spiritual workshop, it's to bring it to schools. It's to bring it to kids. So this question is actually quite important. How to move from a Euclidean geometry to a sacred geometry, or from a quantum physics to a from a Newtonian physics, which is three-dimensional math, or science, to a quantum physics, which is an omnidirectional physics. We have this in science, but we haven't applied that in schooling systems. We don't know the implications of what a quantum universe is. We still are economically and politically living within a Newtonian, very literalizing, three-dimensional space. And I think if we don't experience quantum reality, which is in the inner dance, we're not going to shift. So again, that's a really big question, what you hold. And it would take us not days or an hour to unravel that. It would take us years. If you want to really learn this, you need a project. You can't just conceptualize these things. You want to go into project-based learning. You want to create programs. You want to document some of the effects of these for us to learn. And sometimes you actually need to teach and share this in order to learn more from it. If you want to learn about something, teach it energetically. That allows you to have it emerge from inside yourself. If you don't have a project, if you're not practicing this beyond you, you will not be able to unravel many, many layers of this. So I think the weekend that you're holding with Flor now is a really good start for Dubai. And if you guys could act as a community, yet hold your own ground and where you are unique in this, this is a really good time. At the time of crisis, this is a really good opportunity to bring forth. Thank you.
We're here. We're running out of time here, but I think that you have like still, I don't know, 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
There's just one thing. There's a lot of things that you've opened up that I don't know if you guys could remember, like they have been channeled already in the room earlier, and there's so much reference to a lot of things that you're saying. And yeah, it's so beautiful. Thank you. But there's one thing before we close with you that I love sharing it to people here in the Middle East, but I'd like for it to come from your mouth. That thing that you call the ancient sunlight. Yeah, just a sweet, quick one on that, because I love.
Okay. Oh boy, are you sure? All right. So, oh my God, to speak to this, we're addicted to energy, and oil is the primary source of energy on the planet because it's ancient energy that was stored underneath the earth 400 billion years ago. So when we discovered how to use it, the population of humans on earth rose up exponentially really fast. So right now we're holding 8 billion people on the planet because of oil. And so we are having to find other sources of energy in transcendence of oil, because number one, oil is a finite resource, and there is this cost of production as opposed to the benefits it reaps, those who are extracting it from the ground. So even though alternative sources of energy are coming up, oil was the backbone for how we're sustaining cities and life on the planet in its complex form. So This is almost like a game designed for us to borrow something from ancient sunlight. It's not really just about energy resource depletion, where the oil underneath the ground is finite. If you understand anything about the peak oil phenomenon, some geologists have theorized that around the year 2010, 2012, we actually would have used up half of the oil that is easily available on the surface of the planet. That means 400 million years of oil stored in the ground was actually half used already. And once we reach the peak, when that goes into decline, something will happen. I live in an eco-village because I understood the peak oil phenomenon. Even when I went into my spiritual journey, I was actually coming from concern about this. So when I discovered the energy from inside, I realized that everything we need is already inside of us. So apart from energy resource depletion, it's about climate change. We're releasing so much of the carbon that had been stored underneath the ground. So I believe in the statement, everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. And all of history was situated exactly as it should have. So another word for energy is power. Power. Like, what is power? What is the true nature of power? When you experience power from a psychological field, power is also information. So what plants did was it learned how to store the energy of the sun through what is called photosynthesis. So when you think of how sun is metabolized into glucose and fructose that becomes sugar, carbohydrates, fat, and protein that we eat. A lot of the inner dance story is actually about finding the source of nutrition from inside. You can generate energy from inside. And if humans learn how to do that, we would heal the planet. If we don't know how to do that, then we're in deep shit. We're in trouble. We are in trouble. And if we don't adapt really quickly, spirituality holds possible solutions to climate change and energy resource depletion. And it really has something to do with becoming a powerhouse of energy. So the question you hold is a really painful and yet super relevant question, because you are living on a piece of land that is partly responsible for not the devastation, but the current cycle. And it will have to face these contradictions, these materialistic perspectives on what is actually energy. So I believe that, and that's what makes this a good question, I believe that the paradox is intended by Spirit. So when I do work in places like California or Singapore or Manila, there's actually an awakening waiting where there's density. Usually when there's density in places like Dubai, there's also a lot of information being stored. And when you create not just a photosynthesis, when you synthesize photons, that's how you store sunlight. But when you do the opposite, when you take what's been stored and then you transform that, that will require not a photosynthesis, but a psychosynthesis. From the simple, we stored it, it became protein, fat, it became complex. Like Dubai is complex. If you're going to unravel that complexity and bring it into an integration, what you need is a psychosynthesis. You want to take all of that density and you want to integrate that from within. And for you to do that, you need to go into a time dimension that allows you to hold ancient memories. Because within that oil, within that ancient sunlight is ancient memory. And if you can synthesize that, you can make that new again, you can generate that from within, then we're going to heal the planet from a really strange, inverted space within us. Fantastic question. Scary one, but thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good journey and let me know what happens.
We'll continue from here. Love you.
Love you. Bye.